In just 4 years, nearly 25 million people vanished from Europe. The Black Death, which struck from 1347 to 1351, decimated about 1/3 of the continent's population. The disease, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, spread via fleas on rats. It claimed countless lives in cities like Florence and Paris. This catastrophe arrived with little warning to the general populace. Europe was a continent on the brink of a profound, unwelcome change. The foundations of medieval society were about to be shaken to their very core by this unseen enemy. The arrival of the plague was swift and terrifying for everyone. People in the 14th century had no concept of germ theory. Many attributed the plague to divine punishment for perceived sins. Others believed it was caused by miasma or corrupted air. Some even looked for human scapegoats, leading to tragic violence. Fear spread as quickly as the illness itself through towns and villages. Communities watched helplessly as their numbers dwindled rapidly, changing daily life forever. The Black Death was not just a medical crisis, it was a profound societal one. The world that eventually emerged from the crucible of the plague would be noticeably different. The Black Death is believed to have originated in the arid plains of Central Asia. It was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, a tiny organism. This bacterium primarily lived in fleas, which were common parasites. The fleas, in turn, most often infested black rats. These rats were ubiquitous in human settlements and were frequent, unwelcome passengers on merchant ships. Trade routes, the arteries of medieval commerce, became the main highways for the plague. Genoese trading ships are often identified as primary carriers of the infection to Europe. They are thought to have brought the disease from the Black Sea port of Kaffa, now Feodosia in Crimea. In October 1347, 12 Genoese galleys arrived in the Sicilian port of Messina. Many sailors aboard these ships were already dying or gravely ill with the mysterious ailment. From Sicily, the plague spread with alarming speed to the Italian mainland. Bustling port cities like Genoa, Venice, and Pisa became early epicenters of the outbreak. Ships moved faster than people overland, carrying the infection far and wide across the Mediterranean. The speed of the Black Death's spread across Europe was astonishing to contemporaries. The symptoms of the bubonic plague, the most common form, were terrifying and unmistakable. Victims typically developed painfully swollen lymph nodes, known as buboes. These usually appeared in the groin, armpits, or neck, and could turn black, hence the name Black Death. A high fever, severe chills, and uncontrollable vomiting often followed these initial signs. Death, when it came, usually occurred within a few days of the first symptoms appearing. The swiftness and apparent certainty of death created immense fear and despair. People watched their loved ones suffer and die horribly, with little anyone could do to alleviate their pain or halt the disease's progression. The pervasive fear of contagion led to a significant breakdown of normal social bonds. It was not uncommon for family members to abandon their sick relatives. Doctors and priests, who were expected to provide care and comfort, often refused to attend to victims. Many of them succumbed to the disease themselves. Healthy people, desperate to escape, fled from infected cities and towns. Unfortunately, this flight sometimes helped to spread the disease further into new areas. Normal daily life ceased in many communities as fear took hold. The sheer number of deaths quickly overwhelmed existing burial practices and resources. The Black Death caused an immediate and severe economic shock across the European continent. With so many people dying, all forms of commerce and agriculture were massively disrupted. Fields lay fallow because there were not enough peasants or laborers to cultivate them. Workshops in towns and cities closed as skilled artisans and their workers perished. Trade routes, which had inadvertently served as carriers of the plague, became less active and more dangerous. The production of essential goods, from food to textiles, declined sharply. Simultaneously, demand for many goods also fell, simply because the population of consumers had shrunk so dramatically. The most significant long-term economic consequence was a drastic and persistent labor shortage. In the countryside, peasants were essential for agricultural production, the backbone of the medieval economy. In towns, artisans and general laborers were vital for crafts, construction, and local trade. The plague killed indiscriminately, reducing the available workforce by an estimated 1/3 or even more in some regions. This scarcity of labor fundamentally altered the balance of power between employers and workers. Section 5. Battling an Unseen Enemy. The Dawn of Public Health. When the Black Death struck Europe, medical knowledge was extremely limited by modern standards. Doctors had no effective cure for the devastating disease. Their treatments were often based on ancient Greek and Roman theories, such as the humoral theory. Common practices included bloodletting, purging, and the administration of various herbal remedies and concoctions. None of these interventions were effective against the Yersinia pestis bacterium. Many dedicated physicians themselves died while attempting to treat patients, highlighting their vulnerability. The general public felt increasingly helpless as traditional medicine visibly failed to provide relief or save lives. This failure spurred a search for other ways to combat the plague. One of the most significant and lasting responses to the Black Death was the gradual development of quarantine measures. Authorities in busy Mediterranean port cities like Venice and Ragusa, which is modern Dubrovnik, began to take pragmatic action. They observed that the disease often seemed to arrive with ships and their crews. Consequently, they started to isolate incoming ships, their passengers, crews, and cargo, for a set period. This period of isolation was typically 30 days, known as a Trentine, or, more commonly, 40 days. The term quarantine itself derives from the Italian phrase quaranta giorni, meaning 40 days. Section 6. Culture and Crisis Art, Faith and the Shadow of Death. The Black Death brought the stark reality of mortality to the forefront of European consciousness. Death was no longer an abstract concept discussed by theologians or a distant event. It became a daily, horrifying, and very personal reality for almost everyone. The sheer scale of loss affected individuals, families, and entire communities profoundly. People witnessed their friends, family members, and neighbors die suddenly, and often painfully. This constant, unavoidable exposure to death deeply influenced the prevailing mood of the era. It created a pervasive sense of anxiety, pessimism, and an intense preoccupation with the afterlife and salvation. The fragility of human life became a dominant theme. Art and literature of the period began to reflect this widespread obsession with death. The theme of memento mori, a Latin phrase meaning remember you must die, became increasingly common. Artists depicted skeletons, decaying corpses, hourglasses, and other symbols of mortality. These powerful images served as constant reminders of life's transience and the inevitability of death. Section 7. The Long Road to Recovery, Rebuilding a Changed Europe. By the year 1400, the first and most devastating wave of the Black Death had largely passed. Europe was left battered, traumatized, and significantly depopulated. Some regions had lost as much as half their inhabitants, or even more in localized areas. The physical landscape was visibly altered, with numerous abandoned villages and once cultivated fields slowly returning to wilderness. The psychological scars of the pandemic were deep and pervasive. Fear of the plague's return lingered for centuries, as subsequent, though usually less severe, outbreaks continued to occur sporadically. The immediate and daunting task for survivors was to cope with the immense loss of life and social disruption. The massive depopulation resulting from the plague led to significant social restructuring. The old feudal system, which had been based on a large peasant population tied to the land, was already under strain. The Black Death accelerated its decline, particularly in Western Europe. The severe labor shortages empowered the surviving peasants and urban workers. They found themselves in a position to demand better wages, lower rents, and improved working conditions. This led to greater social mobility for some individuals and families. Section 8. Transformative Aftermath, Lasting Impacts on European Society. The Black Death accelerated the decline of feudalism and manorialism. Serfs found it difficult to meet traditional obligations. Labor scarcity allowed peasants to negotiate better terms or leave. Lords offered wages or new terms to attract workers. This shift weakened the manorial system. The power of the landed aristocracy was reduced. Cities, initially devastated, grew in importance. Economic changes favored urban centers. Trade and commerce eventually revived and expanded. A wealthier middle class gained influence. Higher wages meant more disposable income. This stimulated demand for goods, fueling urban economies. Section 9 echoes through time, the enduring legacy of the Black Death. The Black Death was a demographic catastrophe, fundamentally altering Europe's population for centuries. It took over 200 years for Europe's population to recover. The reduction in population had far-reaching consequences on land use, agriculture, and social structures. The memory of the Black Death lingered, reminding societies of human vulnerability. It led to early public health measures like quarantine and sanitation. These efforts laid the foundation for future epidemic responses.